The woman at the kitchen island looked at us both and said, "You two are so well matched." She said it the way people say things they are entirely certain about. The way you say the building is old, or the weather is cold, as though it were simply visible from standing in the room. Then she looked at Nadia and added, "Your husband has excellent taste in countertops." Nadia smiled. A slow, sideways smile. The kind that takes its time getting where it's going. And she said, "Not yet. Not we're not married. Not we're actually just here professionally." She said, "Not yet." And then she turned back to the open plan layout and told me the sightlines were exceptional. I spent the rest of the showing staring at exceptional sightlines and trying to locate my breathing. My name is Daniel Carr. I'm 34. I work in structural logistics, the part of construction that exists before anyone lays a single beam. The load sequencing and site scheduling, and the long afternoons buried in blueprints until your eyes stop cooperating and you're reading the paper more than the plans. It is not glamorous work. I know this because I have tried to explain it at dinner parties and watched people's faces perform interest while their eyes tracked toward the nearest exit. I live alone in a 2-bedroom in Midtown that I have been meaning to leave for 3 years. The apartment is fine, functional. It has never, at any point in 3 years, felt like somewhere I intended to stay forever, and I had decided that was reason enough to move. Nadia Reyes had been my realtor for 6 weeks. She was 31, which she told me unprompted at our second meeting, along with the fact that she had spent 4 years in corporate law before real estate, a career she described as spiritually correct, but personally devastating. She had a thin scar through her left eyebrow from a bicycle accident at age 9, which she mentioned because she had noticed me notice it and found it simpler to explain. She kept a small succulent on her desk named Gerald and spoke to him with the same brisk affection she applied to everything else. In the second week of our search, she walked into a master bath on the Upper East Side, looked at it once, said no with the gravity of a judicial ruling, and walked out without elaborating. I had liked her from that moment. I had been careful, since that moment, to do nothing about it. That was the arrangement, and it made sense. She was professional. I was her client. She showed me apartments with the practiced objectivity of someone who had learned to love spaces without needing to own them. And I nodded at recessed lighting and asked sensible questions about hoe fees and load-bearing walls, and neither of us said anything that wasn't about real estate. I had been defending this arrangement to myself for approximately 3 weeks with arguments I found very persuasive, right up until the moment a woman at a kitchen island made an assumption. Then Nadia said not yet. The brownstone was in the West Village. 3rd floor walk-up. Original hardwood floors that showed their age without making an apology for it. The kind of apartment that shows well because someone has already done the imaginative work for you. Fresh flowers on the table. Coffee brewing that no one was going to drink. A blanket folded over the arm of the couch in a way that suggested warmth without being too deliberate about it. The listing agent had met us at the door and greeted us with a practiced handshake and the particular expression of someone doing rapid arithmetic. He had looked at us the way listing agents look at couples, with that specific, calculating attention, and I had been about to clarify when he moved on to the pressed tin ceiling, which was, genuinely, exceptional. We had arrived together because I'd texted asking which entrance to use, and Nadia had said she was parking around the corner, so we walked in at the same time. That was the only reason we were side by side. She had her leather folio under one arm and was reading listing notes on her phone. She smelled faintly of cedar and something citrus underneath it, which I had definitely not noticed before, and was not cataloging now in the lobby of a stranger's brownstone. The listing agent made his assumption. Then the woman at the kitchen island confirmed it. Not yet. I should have laughed it off. I should have said something dry about how Nadia was actually a professional, keeping me from apartments with deficient load documentation. Which was true. She had rejected 2 listings on my behalf, with the conviction of someone who had thought it through before I'd even read the email. I said, "None of this." I looked at the Calicut marble. I looked at the sight lines. I looked at everything in that kitchen except the thing I was actually thinking about. Nadia was already moving toward the back of the apartment. I followed. She stopped at the rear bedroom window and pointed at the well and told me the afternoon light would track north here, diffuse rather than direct, which I had told her, at our very first meeting, was what I needed. She had remembered it. She also remembered that I had deep reservations about open shelving, that I mistrusted radiant floor heating on the basis of an incident in an Astoria apartment she had not been part of but had heard in full detail, and that I wanted to hear rain from the bedroom without traffic underneath it. She had been paying attention for 6 weeks, carefully and without announcement, and I had been working very hard to treat this as purely professional. We walked the rest of the apartment in the quality of silence that had become its own language between us. Nadia was not a chatty realtor. She narrated when something mattered and went quiet when she was processing, and over 6 weeks I developed something like a working vocabulary of her silences. The focused one. The disapproving one that preceded a polite rejection. The one that meant she was being fair to something before deciding against it. This silence was different. A degree warmer. She kept her eyes on her notes. In the back hallway there was a built-in bookcase. Old wood, painted over twice in different decades, and then stripped back somewhere between the two. Nadia stopped and ran 2 fingers along the edge of the top shelf. It was a gesture I'd seen before, checking for wobble, for how the joints had held. This time her fingers tightened once before she let go. She said nothing. I said nothing. We looked at the bookcase. I said, "Good bones." She said, "Very good bones." She didn't look at me. Back in the main room, the listing agent was walking another couple through the kitchen, explaining the countertops. The woman from the island caught my eye across the room and offered the warm, certain smile of someone who has read a situation correctly and knows it. I looked at the floor. On the sidewalk afterward, the November air was cold and unambiguous. Nadia pulled her coat closed and glanced at her phone with the expression she got when she was already sequencing her afternoon. She said the asking price was 11 to 12% over comparable recent sales in the block, that the sellers were probably expecting a bidding situation, which she considered optimistic given market pace, but not impossible given the bones. I said, she thought we were married. Nadia was quiet a moment. Then, people pattern match. You said not yet. A shorter pause. Did I? You know you did. She looked at her phone, then at me, then at something over my left shoulder, which was what she did when she was calculating something she hadn't decided to share yet. She said it seemed simpler than a correction. Then she told me the next showing was 40 minutes away in Chelsea, and she'd send the listing notes before we arrived. She walked to her car. I stood on the sidewalk in November for longer than was reasonable. Then I walked to mine. I have genuinely poor survival instincts around women who describe things as simpler than a correction. Here is the argument I had been making to myself for 3 weeks. With some success until now, she was professional. I was her client. The arrangement was clean and working, and there was a version of anything else that ended with someone embarrassed and an apartment search made unnecessarily complicated. I had rehearsed these arguments. I found them structurally sound. I also found that they had stopped holding weight somewhere around the end of week 3, which was roughly when I noticed the cedar and the citrus, which I'm willing to admit was not a recent observation on my part. Not yet is not how professionals respond to strangers' mistakes. Not yet is how a person responds when they've been sitting on something and one corner of it got loose. I went home that evening and stood at my kitchen window for a while. I thought about the text she'd sent at 11:30 on a Tuesday 3 weeks earlier. A listing link with a note saying the bones reminded her of something I'd said about a place in Prospect Heights. Because people don't send messages at 11:30 at night about bones unless they've been thinking about considerably more than bones. I thought about the afternoon she'd corrected a contractor's load estimate on a walkthrough with a precision that meant she'd read the structural report on her own time. Because she'd known I would have caught the error and had apparently decided in advance that I shouldn't have to find it myself. She never mentioned having read it. She just knew. I thought about the showing 3 weeks ago in Carroll Gardens, when a pipe had frozen somewhere above the 3rd floor and started dripping through a light fixture in the hallway. Everyone else had stepped back. Nadia had walked forward, pressed her palm flat against the ceiling plaster, and said quietly, "The whole West run." She'd been right. She'd said it with the authority of someone who had spent time thinking about what could go wrong in a building before anyone told her to, and then she'd looked at me, and her expression had done that thing. The one where it was almost something, and then became professional again before I could name it. I thought about the way she listened, not the polished professional kind that catalogs the useful and discards the rest, but the real kind. The kind that picks up things that weren't meant to be data and files them anyway. The ceiling thing. The rain thing. The open shelving thing I'd mentioned once in passing as a joke. She filed all of it. She had been paying attention to me with a care she had nowhere to put professionally. I thought about Gerald. I thought about the fingers on the bookcase shelf. I thought about not yet. And I made a decision I should have made at least 1 week earlier. I still had 3 showings this month. I would attend them as a client attends showings. And then I was going to say something. The Chelsea apartment was a rental conversion in a building that was working very hard to present as boutique. The hallways smelled of paint applied too recently, before the walls had decided what they were. Nadia walked the perimeter of the main room and noted the southern exposure would cause heat retention in summer, which I'd specified I didn't want, and that the window frames were recent replacements she'd want documentation on. She said it without looking up from her folio. I said she'd already thought of everything. She said that was the job. In the kitchen she stopped and considered the island with her slightly narrowed look. The one that meant something was nearly right, but not quite. She said the width was a half-foot short of what I'd specified early in the search. I said I'd mentioned that preference once, in passing. She said she'd written it down. She clicked her pen closed and looked at me for one brief measuring second before looking back at her notes. I had been counting those seconds for some time. There were more of them than a professional arrangement would naturally produce. She made a note in the folio and then, without looking up, said, "There's a pre-war 2-bedroom in Park Slope I want to show you. It's not listed yet. The agent owes me a look-in." She said it casually, the way she delivered things she'd been sitting on. She had been watching the market for something specific, and she had found it. And she had not waited to tell me. That was the job. That was also, I was beginning to understand, something else. "When?" I said. 2 weeks, maybe less. She closed the folio. "It'll go fast. Then we shouldn't wait." She looked at me for one of those seconds. Then she said she'd make the call that afternoon. On the way out, she paused in the hallway at a potted plant that was clearly not doing well. She pressed her thumb gently into the soil, checking moisture the way she checked everything. Quietly, with competence, she made a small sound of concern. I said, "Like Gerald." She looked at me. I had mentioned Gerald's name once several weeks earlier in an entirely different context. The corner of her mouth shifted in a way she didn't appear to authorize. She said, "Gerald is doing considerably better. Thank you for asking." She pressed the elevator button. "Tell him I said hello." She didn't respond. This also was a response. The elevator came and we stepped in and I watched the doors close and I said, "You said not yet." "Daniel, I'm not asking you to explain it. I'm asking you not to take it back." She held her folio against her chest and looked at the elevator panel. After a long moment she said, quietly, "The brownstone had very good bones." "I know. The sightlines were exceptional. You told me. The Calicut marble was genuinely excellent." "Nadia," she looked at me, with the clear, direct look she used when she was saying something she had chosen carefully. She said, "I changed my calendar entry for your search from car, buyer to something else about 8 weeks ago. I have looked at it every morning since and questioned whether it was appropriate." I said, "What did you change it to?" She looked at the elevator ceiling for a moment. She said, "Daniel, the one with the ceiling thing." The ceiling thing. At our first meeting I had mentioned that I can always feel the proportions of a room from inside it. A spatial instinct built from years on job sites, reading vertical space the way other people read light. She had written it down. She had been looking at that every morning for 8 weeks. The elevator opened. We walked into the lobby and she stopped and turned toward me with the directness she used on listing agents who were overconfident about their sellers' expectations. She looked at me the way she assessed rooms, not for their deficiencies, but for what they could hold. She said, "When someone says not yet, what they usually mean is that they've been thinking about it. I know what they usually mean. I like being your realtor. I know. It's a clean arrangement. I know that too." She went very still. Then she said, "I have been thinking about what this looks like when the search is over. For longer than is professionally appropriate." I didn't plan to say what I said today. It came out because the assumption felt accurate. More accurate than what I'd actually said, out loud, to anyone. She said it plainly, the way she said true things, straight through. No softening, eyes on mine. I'm aware that's not a sufficient professional explanation. I said, "You don't have to keep defending it." She looked at me. I said, "I've been doing the same thing. For about 3 weeks. Probably longer." I thought about the 11:30 text. Longer. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Carefully, that is an awkward situation given the 3 remaining showings this month. You'll finish them professionally, obviously, and after." She looked at her folio, at me, and then she laughed. A real one, not the measured professional version she deployed in meetings, but the kind that comes from somewhere unguarded. The kind that sounds like a woman setting down something she has been carrying for a while, in careful hands. She said, "After, I'll have a client who became a different category. Yes, Gerald will require a formal introduction. I've already sent my regards." She looked at me for a long moment in the lobby of a building that was trying too hard to be somewhere else. Then she said she'd send the next listing notes by Tuesday, that she was going to look at the Park Slope inventory, which she hadn't mentioned before, which meant she'd been looking at it already. She walked to her car. This time, I didn't stand on the sidewalk. 3 months later, I made an offer on a 2-bedroom in Park Slope. North-facing light. Original hardwood. A built-in bookcase I had personally tested for wobble and found excellent. The light tracked exactly north in the afternoon. The bedroom was quiet enough to hear rain without traffic underneath it. Nadia negotiated the sellers down 4.5%, with the quiet certainty of a woman who had been preparing for that specific conversation since the first morning she read the listing and wrote something in the margin I never asked to see. We went to dinner to mark the close. She brought Gerald in a small bag and set him on the table between the breadbasket and the water glass, and told the waiter he was not on the menu. I said that was hiding with better branding. She said she appreciated the vocabulary. 6 months after the close, she was reading on the couch, and I was at the kitchen table with a set of plans I'd brought home. And the rain was coming down outside the bedroom window, the way I described wanting it. Once, in a conversation she had apparently written down somewhere, present and soft, no traffic underneath it. She looked up from her book and looked at the room the way she assessed things, with that quiet competence, and she said, "Good bones." I said, "Exceptional sightlines." She set the book on her chest and looked up at the ceiling and smiled, the slow sideways kind. Years later, when people asked how we got together, I said a stranger at an open house made an assumption. Nadia said she declined to fully correct it. The way she told it, she'd known something was different from the first showing. The West Village brownstone, 3rd floor, very good bones. She'd watched me stand in the kitchen and look up at the pressed tin ceiling, and she'd thought, without planning to, he can feel the proportions of a room by standing in it. And then, immediately after, she'd thought, me too. She filed it under things that were simpler not to say, and she looked at that filing every morning for 8 weeks. There is only so long you can hold on to simpler. Nothing important had appeared overnight. It had simply, one ordinary afternoon in November, stopped hiding. And now, when something in this apartment needed checking, a shelf for wobble, a window frame for age, a ceiling for what it could carry, she checked it with the same 2 fingers, the same quiet certainty. She was almost always right. She had been almost always right from the beginning. It had just taken me a while to stop pretending that was purely professional. What would you have done if a stranger assumed something about you and the person you hadn't let yourself want yet? And have you ever said something out loud, casually, without thinking, and realized afterward it was more honest than anything you'd planned? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one landed for you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.